cumbersome to
It's your turn.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Jerida. Thank you to WHCI for being here, for doing all of this for us. I am calling our Ed Liaison meeting to order, our 422 special meeting of the West Hartford Town Council, Rules of Decorum and Procedure. Again, I am Mayor Sherry Cantor, and I'd like to welcome you to the virtual April 22nd, 2020 special meeting of the Education Liaison Committee of the Town Council. I also serve as chair of the Ed Liaison Committee, which is responsible for joint deliberations with the Board of Education to consider matters of mutual interest affecting the town government and public schools. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to review the fiscal year 2020-2021 town budget as proposed and amended by the town manager and the superintendent of schools. Because in-person attendance at public meetings is likely to increase the risk of transmission of COVID-19, this meeting is being conducted in accordance with Governor Lamont's Executive Order 7B and Section 42 of our standing rules, which permits virtual public meetings. Committee members, other members of the Town Council, the Board of Education, and municipal and school staff are participating by WebEx. Members of the public can view the meeting live on West Hartford Community Television or on West Hartford Community Interactive Comcast Channel 5 and Frontier TV Channel 6098 or at www.whctv.org. The meeting is also being recorded for on-demand viewing, which will be available on the town website. Because of the virtual format, there are some special rules and procedures that I need to cover before we begin. Our Corporation Counsel, Dallas Dodge, is also available to answer any questions about procedure. First, I ask all participants to please mute the microphones on your devices when you are not speaking. Second, pursuant to Executive Order 7B, all speakers must state their name and title each time they speak. Also, participants should not address one another directly. Comments and requests for information must be made through the chair. After you state your name, simply preface your question or comment with "through the chair," and when you are done, I will recognize the person who is most appropriate to respond. Although these practices might feel a little rigid and awkward, they will ensure the meeting is conducted in an orderly fashion and that members of the public who are listening can understand and follow the discussion. Third, we will begin with the presentations from the town manager and the superintendent. When they finish, I will call on the elected officials who are participating in the meeting. In order to assure an orderly process, I will call on you one by one. Per our standing rules, I will begin with members of the Ed Liaison Committee. I will then alternate between the other members of the Town Council and the Board of Education in alphabetical order. When I call on you, you may either make a comment or request information through the chair. I will then direct one of the participants to provide the relevant information if appropriate. I'm not going to place strict time limits on participants. However, I would ask you to please be respectful of everyone's time. This is a big group. Avoid requests for information that are repetitive, rhetorical, or argumentative. Requests for information and comments must be germane to the town and the school budgets. Finally, a reminder that if any participant has a problem with their connection, you should immediately call Jerida Reinheimer, whose phone number you were provided earlier. She will let me know, and we can recess the meeting while the problem is being resolved. If it cannot be resolved quickly, we will ask you to call into the meeting using a phone and participate via audio only. I will now call the roll of elected officials. I will do this in the same order in which I will call on you following the presentations from the administration so that everyone understands what the order is when they are going to get when they are going to get an opportunity to speak. After I call the roll, I will ask the town manager and the superintendent of schools to introduce the members of their staff who are participating. Roll call, and I will do the roll call. Counselor Blanks.
Here.
Counselor Williams.
Present.
Board of Education Chairwoman Deb Pullen.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Davidoff.
Here.
Board Member Aronson. Board Member Aronson, I see you. I will come back to Amanda. Can you hear me now? Yes. Sorry, I can't turn the audio on your computer. I'll come back. You can mute. Okay. Councilor Fay? Councilor Fay? I don't hear Councilor Fay's response yet.
I'm here, Mayor.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Board of Education Vice Chairwoman Thomas Farquharson.
Here.
Thank you. Councilor Gold.
Present.
Councilor Gold, thank you. Board Member Levine.
It's Levine, Mayor, and I'm here.
Levine, I'm sorry, my bad. I know that. Councilor Kerrigan.
Councilor Beth Kerrigan here.
Thank you. Board Member Sean Payson. Is Sean there? I can't hear Sean. Board Member Payson.
Hello, I'm here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councilor Sweeney.
Here.
Board Member Steinberg.
Here.
Thank you. Councilor Winograd.
Here.
Board Member Zdanowitz.
Present.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we will go to our Town Manager, Matt Hart, for introductions and presentation.
Town Manager Matt Hart present, along with Peter Privatera, our Director of Finance. Would you like me to proceed with the presentation now, Mayor, or did you have
Yes.
additional introductions?
No, yes, Mr. Hart, and then I will introduce the Superintendent when you are done. Thank you.
Okay, very well. Thank you all for joining us at tonight's meeting. We generally meet, this committee generally meets once a year, as you know, to review the budget. And glad we were able to get together in a virtual format here. I have a few introductory remarks, and then I would like to turn to the slides that we uploaded on Board Docs and sent you earlier today. So back on March 10th, and I mentioned this to the council a couple nights ago, you know, that was 6-7 weeks ago, but it seems like years, given all that we've been through. And on that night, we presented what we thought was a very responsible budget, designed to meet our needs, designed to provide quality services and programs that we're all very, very proud of. But over the past several weeks, this public health crisis has certainly changed the world, including the town of West Hartford, with significant ramifications for our economy. We know that we stand to lose significant non-tax revenue during the last quarter of this fiscal year. To accommodate this shortfall, on the town side, we have initiated a spending and hiring freeze. We've laid off 130 part-time employees. And I know the superintendent of schools has taken similar actions on his side of the budget. So at the local level, we're very concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on our property taxpayers. And consequently, council leadership on both sides of the aisle asked me to submit revisions to my proposed budget that would eliminate the need for any property tax increase. So some weeks ago, I approached Mr. Moore, Tom, regarding this issue, and he's been very willing to work with me in this regard and has been an extraordinary partner like always. So the revisions that we want to share with you tonight would result in an overall increase in expenditures of 1.14%, as well as a slight tax decrease for most taxpayers. On the town side of the budget, and I know this holds true for the schools as well, the proposed revisions would lead to a reduction in some services. And we plan to review the ramifications of those service reductions at our upcoming budget workshops with the council. And we can address them in a more general manner tonight and field questions from you all. But I do want to emphasize that the revised budget, it is designed to maintain the essential services that are provided by our award-winning school district and our town departments, and to preserve West Hartford's quality of life. You know, what makes us special, why people want to come here to live and run a business. We're approaching this with a mindset of a 2 to 3 year recovery period. You know, perhaps it will take longer. But we will seek to restore services over time as the economy improves. I also want to emphasize that there are many uncertainties. You know, we do not know when and how we will be reopening the schools and our town facilities to the public, and how those plans may impact our expenditures. For example, on the town side, the budget revisions that I've presented to the council contemplate that our pools will be closed this summer for a significant savings. If we can, for public health reasons, if we are in a position where we can reopen them or open them, we will. And we'll need to make budget adjustments in order to do that. Similarly, we may need new infrastructure when we open. You know, we don't know yet if we're going to have to do temperature checks at the door, if we're going to need to install plexiglass protection at all of our counters, any number of things we may need to do. So the larger point I'm trying to make is that we need to be prepared to handle various contingencies during a very uncertain time. And that's why it's important not to exhaust the reserves that we've carefully built up over the years in any one year, as we may need them for some time to come. We may need to draw upon them. So I'd like to thank the members of our management team, our Director of Finance, Peter Privatera, who is instrumental in crafting the proposed revisions, as well as my colleague with the West Hartford Public Schools. So let us now take a look at the slides that we sent you earlier today. They're also located on board docs. If you're in board docs, you see under the call to order section, you will see 2 attachments there. So open the attachment labeled, this is the one on the right-hand side, TM for Town Manager, TM FY21 proposed budget. So if everyone could open that up. So the first slide you will see is a snapshot of the budget we proposed back on March 10th. And you'll see a summary of the revenues up top and a summary of the expenditures down below. And as you will note, in aggregate, we were proposing an expenditure increase of 4.12%, approximately $12.2 million. And that would have necessitated a 3.59% increase in the mill rate. Moving on to the next slide, April 20th proposed. Here is a snapshot or an overview of the budget, the proposed budget that both the superintendent and I have revised. So looking at revenues on the top of the page, we've got our current year property taxes. You can see the intergovernmental revenues towards the middle of the page. That's our second largest revenue category. You can see various charges for service, transfers from other funds, and you'll see that those are more substantial. Anyhow, on the revenue side, you would see an overall increase of $3,378,000 approximately, a revenue increase of 1.14%. And then we match that number as we need to do on the expenditure side of the budget. So looking at town services, you see where we break down between wages and salaries. We would see a net decrease there of 1.18%, approximately $800,000, as we have anticipated some number of vacancies. As I said, we've already laid off 130 part-time employees. Many of those folks we will not be bringing back. Operating expense, this is where you see the most significant increase of approximately $1.9 million. That is driven by a lot of things that are difficult to control, and I know you have some of the same things on the school side. On the town side, that includes our contribution to the MDC for sanitary sewer service. It also includes a new cost we've had to absorb on the under waste management to handle recycling services, as well as some other key things. And then our fringe benefits and insurance, you see an increase of approximately $990,000, 2.31%. So town services overall, with these revisions, you would see an increase of approximately $2.1 million, 1.92%, for a budget of approximately $112.5 million for next fiscal year. Then you see the superintendent's proposal, and I know he'll be elaborating on this, at a little under $1.3 million increase, or 0.75%. Capital financing, we would see a slight decrease for next fiscal year. And the total for capital financing, that is for general obligation bonds we issue for projects, for both municipal projects as well as school district projects. So all of our major capital projects, whether we're purchasing a piece of fire apparatus or doing a new roof on the school, they're all grouped together in our capital improvement program, as you know. And the main financing tool we use for those projects is the issuance of general obligation bonds. So every year we pay debt service, and that's what's in the capital financing line. So overall, town expenditures would increase by that $3,378,192, 1.14%. I will now ask Mr. Privatera to speak to the final slide we have to outline the various amendments that we made in more detail. And I need to do that through you, Mayor. If you could recognize Mr. Privatera for that purpose.
Yes, Mr. Hart, thank you. Mr. Hart, Mr. Privatera, you are on. This is our Financial Director, Peter Privatera.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Pete Privatera, Finance Director for the town. As the town manager mentioned, and he did a thorough explanation on the changes, but overall, on the town side, between wages, operating expenses, and fringe benefits and insurances, the town budget will decrease by about $4.2 million. And on the board side, as you all know, the board budget will decrease by $4.6 million, an overall decrease in expenditures of a little over $8.8 million. On the revenue side, we're looking at a drop in interest and lien fees, primarily driven by the tax deferment program. That's our best estimate on lost interest, assuming a certain percentage of the taxpayers in both residential and commercial will defer paying their taxes for the first quarter of next fiscal year. Charges for services, a drop of $175,000, as I will discuss later on. We are assuming that the pools will not open. We're also assuming reduction in some services related to senior centers and the Elmwood Community Center. And that represents a drop in revenue of about $175,000. Miscellaneous revenue drop of $250,000. That represents a drop in investment income from our investments. As you all probably know, the interest rates have been dropping, and we have to reflect the probable loss of that revenue from our investments. Transfers into other funds. Basically, that's increasing because we have a unit in the facilities department that manages all the capital projects. This represents 70% of the salaries and benefits associated with the individuals in that unit. We didn't capture the benefits piece before. That's why there's such a significant increase on the revenue coming back to the town from the capital projects fund. And we're identifying the use of $1.5 million of fund balance. Manager stated what this results in is a mill rate of 41.74 mils. That's reduced from his original proposed 43 mils. It's a reduction of 4% from the original proposed increase of 3.59%. Now I'll review the significant changes by departments. I did not identify every department. We have a number of departments that we had minor changes in, but these are the significant departments that will impact certain level of services. The fire department, a reduction of roughly $162,000, primarily related to a reduction in overtime. A police department, a reduction of $593,700. Now, a significant portion of that is the transfer of 2 officers, payroll and benefits back to the parking fund, a model that we used a few years ago. I'm also assuming a hiring lag in the police department for vacancies. You know, we're also making an assumption that people are going to retire during the course of the year, and we will have payroll savings associated with those vacancies as well. I've reduced some temporary payroll in the department and also made miscellaneous account adjustments. In community development, there was a new office operations specialist position that was helping out, that would have been helping out in the building department. That new position is eliminated. I'm also assuming a hiring lag for a vacant position that probably won't be filled, and miscellaneous account adjustments in that department as well. In public works, a reduction of $416,400, primarily a reduction of temporary payroll, and it's really going to affect the grounds maintenance division. I'm also assuming a hiring lag in that department, assuming that there will be some vacancies that come up during the course of the year. I've also had to make some adjustments for contractual service for snow removal operations. Again, in snow removal, we never know what it's going to be, but based on a couple of years trend, I felt comfortable making those reductions. I've also made some minimal reduction in overtime. There was a new program in the Public Works Department. It's a parts management program where we'd hire an outside firm to come in and manage all of our parts, which would free up the supervisor and the mechanics. That was to start on July 1st, but that's pushed back to January 1st. In facility services, a reduction of roughly $225,000. A reduction of temporary payroll by 15%. And that temporary payroll is primarily used to maintain facilities, and also in a reduction of utilities based on our current year projection, where we feel we're going to generate additional savings. In leisure and social services, a reduction of temporary payroll across all programs, including senior centers and Elmwood Community Center. Now, a reduction in programs is only because at the beginning of the fiscal year, we're not sure what programs are going to be up and running. We're not sure, when they're going to open. And I'm making an assumption here that if it's done gradually, there will be a decline in some programs. And also, as the town manager mentioned, close all outdoor pools for the summer season. In the library, a reduction of temporary payroll, which will result in approximately a 20 to 25% reduction of operations and programming in the library. It'll result in reduced hours. In the contingency account, we're making an assumption of a reduction of $675,000, and we're going to pursue discussion with the unions on what we can do or what they can do in conjunction with us to help us out to reduce that liability. Pension contribution reduction. Our initial actuarial determined employer contribution was about $1.1 million higher next year. I had a discussion with the actuaries about blending in mortality tables that they use for that calculation, and they agreed it was appropriate to do. That resulted in a reduction in $889,000. So that $1.1 million increase turned out to be a $200,000 increase. And on the town side, it was roughly $648,000. I also shared that information with Liz Hewitt at the board, and I noticed that you had reduced the superintendent reduced his budget by about $189,000 as well. And on employee benefits, a reduction of $500,000 that we plan on taking advantage of some of the reserves in the risk fund as well. So those are the major reductions in the town manager's amended proposed budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Okay, so I think I'd prefer to go right now to Tom Moore. If there's nothing further from Peter or from Matt, are you all set with your presentation? Matt, would you like to make any more comments?
Matt Hart, Town Manager. Just want to thank Mr. Privatera for his comments there. Again, we've worked to structure this carefully to try to preserve most of our programs and services, and you can see where the impacts would be on our more discretionary services, but they are very important to the community, both in leisure and social services, as well as the library. So I'll close for now, Mayor, and turn things over to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And now I will introduce Mr. Tom Moore, Superintendent of Schools. Mr. Moore.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. So I want to thank Liz Hewitt, my Director of Budget and Finance, who went through all the budget with me, Andy Morrow, my Assistant Superintendent, my whole team who was on, because it's been really difficult, as you all know, to make changes on the fly to a budget that we felt we had already made a lot of changes that were difficult choices coming in. But at the same time, we recognize the crisis situation that we're in and the difficulty that we all face in that we're planning for something that we're planning a ride without a destination. We don't know whether we're a recession, whether we're a depression, whether there's a quicker bounce back. We don't know what we're going towards, and we don't know what school's going to have to look like. But we tried our best with the presentation, as you can see. If we go to the second slide, I always do this. Now I'll go quicker tonight than typically during this meeting, in that we've been here before, but it's important to note what who we are in our schools, and a couple drivers that people may not think about. Once again, both of our high schools were just named in the top 5% of American schools in U.S. News and World Report. We're the only community of our size in New England with schools like that. But what's really interesting about that is how different we are than every other school on that list. 22% of our students have a non-English home language. That's 72 different languages. 4,092 of our students come from what's labeled a minority background in state reporting. 27% of our students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And that means, nationally, that number means that 27% of our kids, more than 1 in 4, makes less than $40,000 a year for a family of 4. That's a national standard, not a West Hartford standard. So you think about what these kids are dealing with in terms of food insecurity, which is why it was so important during this crisis that we get our lunch program up and running, our grab and go program immediately, as well as getting our technology out to kids. Then, and this is the unique driver. It's not unique. It's the same everywhere, but West Hartford has a higher preponderance of pre-K students receiving special education services. And we've talked before that we're a destination district, and I'll talk a little bit about what a budget driver special education is. It's kind of anytime you talk about those things that you don't have control over, we don't have control over who moves into town and what their needs of that child might be. And we don't get to say no. It's federal law. If a child has an individual education plan that dictates that they have a nurse with them because they have a feeding tube, we have numerous students with this, we can't say no. We have to provide that service to that child. If we can't provide the services to a child within a public school setting, a typical public school setting, then they have a right to a free and appropriate public education, which might mean an outplacement. Those outplacements can range from $100,000 in cost to residential placements that we're talking $200,000, $300,000 for a child. Again, that's not an option we have to choose not to. And we do our best to plan where we are. And we had sat at about 12%. That 13% is pre-K through 12 students last year. We're estimating we'll be at about 13.8% now. And part of that is because that's what our K-12 student numbers look like. To give an example of how this comes about and why this is really the unique driver, this past year, from July 1st on, we ended up, after school ended, having 72 students with a special education designation move into West Hartford. Each of those child with unique needs, none of those children having been in West Hartford when we did the budget before. So this year we were actually running a deficit and having to take from other programs, cutting supplies, not filling open positions, that we can make up the costs that were going to special education. There's one thing that kind of describes why that's the case and why West Hartford is a destination district. When you look at students that live with autism in a typical district, if you take Connecticut, if you take the United States, autism occurs, you've got about a 12% of your special education students. So of the special education pool, about 12% of them will have a designation of a child living with autism. In West Hartford, it's 19 to 20% of those students, of our students, have a designation, where a manifestation where they're living with autism in one form or another. Those are increased needs. People move to town for our special education services and because of the quality of our programs. We've had students move into town since we've been doing digital learning. And that's every student that's moved into town during this time has been a special education student. That's every new student that's registered. So this is something, there are things that are different in West Hartford. If you take deaf and hearing impaired, if you combine all of the communities around us and add them all together, and I'm talking 20 communities, you don't equal the number of deaf and hearing impaired students that West Hartford has. And that involves interpreters, that we have to make sure that those kids get the same education as any other child. And as a parent, I do not blame those parents at all. They're asking for what their child needs and what their rights are. So that's the unique driver. Even as we see overall population declining, again, it's a slow decline. But our special education population has gone up during that same time. If we take the comparisons of the net current expenditure per pupil, for us to educate a child in West Hartford costs $17,001 per pupil. The DIRG that we're compared to, District Reference Group, is DIRG B. So that's the Avon, Simsbury, Farmington, South Windsor, some of the communities on the Gold Coast, Greenwich. Those schools, the average cost per student is $17,979. So if we actually spent at what their average expenditure was, our budget would be $9.7 million higher than what last year's budget was. If we spent at the state average last year, our budget would have been $4.3 million higher. So what that meant when I proposed the roll forward, but when we looked at the budget, last year's budget was $168.8 million. Just to do the exact same things we've done, we did this past year because we had to add staff for special education. There was spending we didn't see. It would have been a 5.14% increase to the budget, or $8.68 million. As we looked at that, we made some difficult choices in the proposal that I put forward to make it more reasonable and something that the board could have supported and that the town council could have supported. That would have led to a net increase of $5.87 million, or a 3.48% increase. Now, we've made a series of amendments that can get us into a range that is acceptable, understanding the parameters that the new normal that we're dealing with. And that included $85,000 eliminating a new math coach position at the middle school level, eliminating increase in school supplies budget, $30,000, consolidating 3 bus routes. And that's the kind of thing that saves $190,000 to consolidate these routes. And it's something we've looked at with our student population. But again, that could go by the wayside if we have limits on how many kids can be on buses. You could actually see us forced into a position of adding buses, depending on what school looks like when we go back in the fall. Reduce our utility budget through use of current year utility savings. It was a warm winter anyway, and then we had our closing, so that's about $250,000 in savings. As Peter Privatera mentioned, the reduction in the town pension plan, that's another $189,000 in savings. The state partnership plan, our premium rates. As you know, our teachers and all of our unions have moved into the state partnership plan, and the rates came in very good this year, lower than our assumption earlier was lower, and then we were able to lower it further based on the premium rates, so that's another $380,000 deduction. And this is where now we're kind of in the choice of cuts. We can't make further cuts that change the nature of our schools and change the character of our schools. So what we're choosing to do is fund our retiree health costs next year from our Board of Ed retiree health reserve. And so that's using $1.976 million from those reserves. And then what we're going to do is deposit any surplus funds that we have into a non-lapsing account for fiscal year 2020, 2021. So we're looking at about $1.5 million in savings. And I can't get into full specifics on that because I don't have the final number yet. That's things like we're not using any substitute teachers for the remainder of the year. Again, this number could be lower because we don't even know if we're not coming back to school yet. Once we get that final word of if there will be school back, if there won't be school back, we'll have a better idea. The other thing is, the governor made it in his executive order that we had to maintain our bus contracts, but in a reasonable manner based on what our bus companies had provided for us. Each district in the state is in the process of negotiating with their bus companies about what those costs really are and what those savings are, and did they keep their employees on. We're still in those negotiations. So we have an assumption, but to publicize our assumption while we're in the middle of negotiations wouldn't be a wise negotiating strategy. So overall, if you take all of our savings together, that's about a $1.5 million shift that we can apply to next year. Total adjustments to the budget being $4.6 million less than the proposed budget. So that takes us down to $170.07 million, or a 0.75% budget increase. So again, I want to thank my whole team that's on board for the work that they've done to make difficult choices. And I echo Matt, I appreciate his and Peter's work with Liz, Andy Morrow, myself, as we've tried to make sure that these changes don't permanently alter our schools. And we expect that next year is going to be another very difficult budget year. But hopefully we'll have a little bit more knowledge of what we're looking at than what we are now. In talking to superintendents around the state, we're all in kind of that same boat where we're looking at what exactly can we do to maintain what we have. The education commissioner in a meeting today was talking about, he really doesn't want to see larger classes anywhere, which is the 86% of our costs now are basically tied into personnel. So really the only levers we have for significant savings is making classes bigger and removing staff. This budget, by the way, will end, if this is the final budget, there'll be 15 less employees. That's a lot of it's by attrition in terms of at the elementary school, we'll have 2 less sections of classes across the whole district. The middle school will get some savings. from language and otherwise, but there's also shifts that we're making in positions we'll be choosing not to fill as we move forward. So 15 less positions overall. So with that.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, and thank you to your team. We know your team is very good because they were on our team too. So thank you so much for that and the coordinated
Exactly.
and the coordinated effort. This was a lot to prepare for both of you, and I really appreciate all. I do a lot of talking, and I talk. I want everybody here to get their questions answered. So I'm going to start with Counselor Blanks, actually, on any questions that you might have. And if you don't have a question, and then you think of one, I'll come back to you. So don't feel like this is, you have this opportunity and then we pass and then there's something else that you can't ask. But just be respectful that everybody probably has something they want to ask, but also it's probably not something they want to, are only they are thinking of it. It's probably something that we all have some curiosity about. So I'll start with Ms. Blanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, Madam Mayor, Councilor Blanks, Town Council. Mr. Moore and your team, I just have a couple of questions. One on the retiree health reserve. What percentage of that reserve is being used to contribute?
Thank you, Ms. Blanks. Mr. Moore, do you have the answer to that?
I would actually go to Liz Hewitt for that.
Okay, Ms. Hewitt, are you on the phone here, on the computer, whatever we are on, wherever we are?
I am on. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
Over to you.
Yes. So that will be using 15%.
Actually, can you just state your name and your title for the record? Right. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Elizabeth Hewitt, Director of Finance and Planning for West Hartford Public Schools. Use of 1.9 million of our retiree health reserve equates to 15% of the total available reserve.
Thank you, Ms. Hewitt. Ms. Blanks, back to you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll reserve to ask another question later.
Thank you, Ms. Blanks. All right. And next we will go to Counselor Williams. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Through you, Madam Mayor, this is Chris Williams, Town Council. Thank you, Matt and Mr. Moore, Mr. Hart and Mr. Moore for your presentations. Mr. Moore, I just have a question, and it's one I sort of ask you on an annual basis now. So the school system has the declining enrollment, and I went through the budget, and there looks like on a percentage basis with particular elementary schools, there is starting to be a precipitous drop. Like certain schools like Webster Hill, there's 32 projected less seats next year, or students, I should say, not seats. Morley 10 less. You do see increases in Charter Oak. So overall, the drop is only 42, but in particular schools, on a percentage basis, it's larger than the overall number would suggest. And so when we then look at some of the issues in terms of the budget, when we have this declining enrollment, we also have infrastructure concerns with maintaining these buildings, because let's face it, a lot of the schools we have in town are older, and we just last night we're talking about new projects at Northfelt and what have you. When you raise the concerns about the special education costs and that increasing, that restrains your ability on the budget side. I understand that. So what I'm getting at is what's the vision for school consolidation? Because to me, it's ugly, and everyone loves their neighborhood schools, and I understand that, and I appreciate that. But it looks to me that our model of 11 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, and then 2 high schools is going to inevitably have to change. And I think that is a place where we could find cost savings so that you have money to deal with things like the increase in special education costs, and so forth and so on. And so my question. Sorry. So my question. What's the plan with that? What would we need to do as a town to start looking at closing buildings? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Moore, to you.
Yeah, no, this is Tom Moore, Superintendent. This is a question, we've talked about this before, Chris. When we look at declining enrollment, in effect, I want people to remember, we're not declining from a regular time. We're declining from an all-time high. And we're declining from a time where while we didn't add a building, we added over 30 portable classrooms during the time of the 2000s. And what we had was you had the baby boom and then you had the baby boom echo, okay? And so we've seen other area districts declining at the percentage of they've lost 15% of their students, 18% of their students, 20% of their students. We're still in the single digits from that. And kind of the good news, bad news, depending on how you want to look at that, we're already seeing that the decline of kids that are in, if we look at the birth rate over the past 2 years, not only is it flattened, it's actually come up again. And we may be looking at, in the out years, not just the baby boom, then the baby boom echo, but the echo of the echo, and actually kind of another flattening. So, for instance, when you were in school, we're basically at the number we were at when you were in school. And so for the middle schools right now, we do not have the space to like close Bristow. We wouldn't have enough students. And even though we've seen that kind of decline get to the middle schools, we haven't been there. The other things that we have to remember is that those numbers don't necessarily include our pre-K classrooms. So whereas Wedding Lane may look in their regular K through 6 program, they have declined, but their pre-K program has increased. We didn't have that 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So in effect, the biggest thing I can say is over the time that I've been assistant superintendent, we have closed a school. We've cut 32 classrooms. So whereas you're right that we don't have the savings from one big school. And so if you take a school, a general elementary school, you can assume the savings from closing a school and going through redistricting throughout the town to be about $300,000 to $400,000 total, one-shot deal. We actually are getting savings from eventually pulling off all of those, not all of them, but some of the portable classrooms, which typically are energy pigs and fall into disrepair after a while. But we were spending $500,000 a year in the early 2000s adding all those portable classrooms. So if you're asking me to look at it, 2 years ago, I felt like there may be a time 7 years down the road, if the trend continued, where you'd be looking at one of those elementary schools. Right now, there's no place, if you look on a neighborhood map, that you could say, okay, we'll cut this school and they can both now fit together. That's not happening. I mean, it doesn't work. To do that, you would need a district-wide redistricting. You would have to change all of those schools. You would have to add far more busing to the district, so that cost would actually eat into it also. So I would say this, I don't see that in the next few years, and I can also probably say that with the pressures now that we have after having gone through this pandemic, as far as distancing in the classroom and not meeting in hallways, because we've had different groups that have met in hallways or crowded into very small spaces in some of our schools. I just don't see, if I'm being honest, a time when I'm going to be recommending in the next 3 years. And the problem with elementaries is to plan 7 years from now or 6 years from now, we're talking about kids that haven't been born yet. And so even when you take a school like Wedding Lane, if we say 30 kids, that's 30 less kids there this year. Because yes, sometimes they happen in one school than the others, but we have 6 grades there. So that's actually 5 kids a grade. And you take 2 classrooms, so it's 2.5 kids per classroom. So there's some ebb and flow that goes with it. So I know it's a question that comes up a lot, but we're just frankly not at the point where I foresee in the near future closing the school. I mean, or at least not something that I'm going to be recommending.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Williams, back to you. Anything further?
No, thanks. I just from the I understand educational the redistricting. I guess the side of it is that there's an infrastructure that I think costs of maintaining buildings. That it seems to me a bigger issue to move forward. And I think not only the education is part of this and important, but so is the out years and what burden may be because of the structure.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Moore.
So more superintendent. I get your point exactly, Chris. It's just that those savings and the decline we've had, you divide it out by 16 schools. We don't have that one place. I would love to be able to say we're going to cut back on our CIP because we're going to have one less building. We're dividing all of those losses over 13 grades, not including pre-K. And now what's happening really is our elementaries are stabilized now. After this year, we're assuming 2 less classrooms this year. Next year, it looks flat. The year after that, it looks flat. The year after that, maybe a 1-person increase. Now, again, that depends on those cohorts and where they come. So now you're getting those savings are coming in the middle school and high school. So the elementaries now are basically where they're going to be. The high schools, you'll get some savings because you can go through, mathematically less teachers over time. Middle schools, you can do the same. That's where we're getting the savings this year is middle school teams. But we're never going to be at the point where we're closing Conator Hall. We have 2 of them. Each school can hold about 1,500. It's an interesting balance that a lot of the decline has actually been on the north end of town, where you've looked at it. And King Philip is a big building and can hold a lot of people. But we're still not at the point that even now that you could take our middle schools and put them into one. They'd be bigger than they were when we built the 3rd middle school to relieve the overcrowding. So we're just not at that point yet. So I understand the point, and I look at it, and I hope to get it. We're just not there yet.
Mr. Williams, anything further? Okay. Next is Board of Education Chairwoman, Deb Pullen.
Good evening, Deb Bowlin, Board of Ed Chair, and I don't have any questions right now, so I'll just let us move along to whoever might have a question.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Deputy Mayor Davidoff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd first like to start with a comment, and I want to first thank both the town and the board administration for working so diligently on these budget reductions. This is uncertain times. This has never happened before, where we've modified a budget before the town council has even examined any of the items that are in there. So I wanted to first express my gratitude for all your hard work and your diligence. With respect to the special education dollars and the formula that's necessary to provide the services, and this is a comment, not really a question, there needs to be more at the state level to reimburse our community with respect to those needs. And that needs to be some type of sliding scale, in my opinion, that the more students you serve, the larger your reimbursement should be based on student population. I just want to get a question first to Mr. Hart with respect to the fact that this crisis has caused us much uncertainty and whether or not we have dollars earmarked for potential needs for PPE, additional sanitation and disinfecting type things, retrofitting of our buildings going forward, because we have no idea, no clue as to the length of this pandemic or how business will be moving forward. And also to Superintendent Moore as to what kind of dollars aren't in this budget to provide for the unmet needs of some of our students who aren't able to do the distance learning, who really need some type of program that requires more hands-on, one-on-one personal attention to meet their educational goals. While it's true that we continue the safe distancing, we can never lose sight of the fact that this is a time loss in a child's educational spectrum, and we need to definitely stay focused on that and see if there's some way moving forward, if this situation allows for us to meet those needs.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. I'll go to Mr. Moore first. Will you please answer Mr. Davidoff's question?
Sure, Tom Moore, Superintendent. Mr. Davidoff, that's the thing we're most worried about. Gretchen Nelson, our Director of Pupil Services, she and I talk daily about this. How are we going to meet the needs of those kids that are in our special education? Teachers are doing an unbelievable job right now, meeting with kids one-on-one digitally to try to get them there. But the fact is, we can't go into people's homes and deliver the services to our most impacted families. And talking to these families, it's heartbreaking to see what's happening. And we know we've got kids that are sliding backwards, that have been making progress and now aren't. And I am deeply concerned about that. To tell you, no, we've got the money in the budget for that. No, we don't have a line item for that. I don't know what those costs are going to be, because if we're ordered to pay, because that could be a whole range of amounts. We have a plan for extended school year during the summer that hopefully there's elements that may be digital. There's elements that some people maybe could do some one-on-one work. Maybe, we don't know yet. Maybe we start the school year for some kids earlier with compensatory education, earlier in August. But you could see decisions with compensatory education that we're not talking about, this would be a $100,000 decision, a $200,000 decision. We're talking about millions of dollars that would require at some point, because you mentioned the state and reimbursement. We're promised 100% reimbursement with the way the bill was written. We get 68% reimbursement. It's the same across the state. This is West Hartford has a special education cost issue because we have so many kids, but it's the same as any other district. But the federal government, the initial decision is that districts have to do the best they can. Well, we already have lawyers contacting us about difference of opinions about what the best we can be. And so we're going to need more direction from the federal government. We're going to need more direction from the state government. And frankly, we're going to need more stimulus money that will go towards special education in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And now to you, Mr. Hart. This was on preparation, more PPE, and other COVID-related expenses that we anticipate.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager, and Deputy Mayor, thank you for your question. With respect to PPE, our team's done a great job, and we are well stocked for the near future. And also, you will recall, Council 2 meetings ago set aside $375,000 for us to use to handle the initial phases of this crisis. What I am more concerned about are things we don't know yet, our infrastructure we might need. As I talked about at the beginning of my presentation, are we going to need certain devices to check temperature at both the town and the schools? Are we going to need to make physical improvements to all of our public areas? Those are the unknown costs right now that I'm more concerned about. So if we face those and they're substantial, I think we would look to our capital non-recurring expenditure account. We've got a couple $1 million in there. That's also reserved for other purposes, as you know. We could draw some money there. We may need to look to fund balance. We may need to look to make other adjustments in the capital fund, or we may need to issue debt service, depending on the magnitude and the cost of that infrastructure. But that's my larger concern. Near term, I think due to the good work of our team, we're in a good place with respect to PPE for our essential personnel, which includes public safety, public works, and facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Davidoff, anything else? Anything further? Okay. Next is board member Amanda Aronson. Amanda, we can't hear you.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, but it's echoey, so I'm wondering if yeah, I wonder if the phone, maybe you should.
Thank you, Mayor. Is it still echoing? Sorry about that. Your internet connection keeps going in and out, so I had to call into the meeting. I have no questions at this time, but I just wanted to thank this team for the collaboration, the continued communication, and the collegiality. I think it's very calming for the community and has resulted in a much more efficient process than frankly I expected at this point. And we had a lot of time through our budget workshop last night to go through some of the nuances of the education pieces. So I have no further questions right now.
Thank you, Ms. Aronson. I appreciate that. Councillor Fay, you are next.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Cantor. This is Town Councilwoman Mary Fay. Not sure if mine are questions either. I took a couple notes as you were going through the presentation, and of course, Matt, I saw your first one already, so addressed some already. But I guess I'd start off with an observation, for lack of a better word, and I don't want anybody to take this as a criticism or not a positive, because obviously there was a big movement from the first budget that we saw to this one, and I think our taxpayers will be very grateful for that, Mr. Hart. So thank you, and Mr. Privateria, for all the work you did to get to where we are now. But looking at these, a lot of these are, I guess I would call them delays or stage tiring. They're not really savings. There is an actual savings that takes place because you're hiring 6 months later or whatever the number will be. But you mentioned earlier, and I think we're all of the same mindset, that we're going to have a very difficult budget year for the foreseeable future, really. I think it's going to take a while for our economies to come back. So my observation would be, I think we're going to run into some of these same issues, because just if you're delaying, you're going to pull a trigger, you're going to put the expense in, and we're going to have a problem next year. So that was observation number one. The second was I get a little bit nervous when I guess this applies to both the town budget as well as the Board of Ed, when we're taking things out of reserves. We have reserves for a reason. We've got our ratings that we have to go through with the ratings agency. We want to maintain our high credit ratings when we issue bonds. So I do get a little bit nervous just seeing that taken out of reserves. I was pleased with, I forget who asked the question, but that the number for I think it was the retiree health, was 15% of the total reserve. So I think that's okay, but I don't know how much. There was another reserve impact. Let's see, I think it was for just employee benefits on the town side. So those were just a couple of observations, and maybe you could give us a little bit more color around that. And then the last thing I guess I'll say is sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be good. So, we have no idea when we're going to be opened up and when people are going to be, back to quote unquote normal. I'm not sure there will be such a thing as normal, but the pools, you know, if we kind of luck out with the town not being open, I think people will be able to accept that. But playing devil's advocate, I think if it's a high visibility item, people love our pools, there's swim teams, the kids love it, they're in their neighborhoods. So I think we might have to reevaluate that depending on how the situation changes with the pandemic. So those are my comments. I think there wasn't really a direct question other than the one about the reserve coming down for employee benefits. And then just if you could answer a little bit about how you think you're going to be able to address the delays that are going to pop up in next year's budget. I'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fay. I think we'll start with Mr. Hart, and if maybe Mr. Privatera will fill in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager, and thank you, Councilor Fay, for your questions. Let me touch on 3 or 4 key points, and then through you, Mayor, see if Mr. Privatera wants to add anything. So first of all, with respect to hiring lags, we know, especially with our larger departments, particularly in public safety and to a lesser extent in public works, we have almost constant turnover. And a hiring lag also gives us an opportunity to evaluate. So if, for example, next year we're in a more difficult position and we can't afford to fill the position, even if it's late in the year, you know, we'll hold off. But the lag will help us to realize some nearer term savings. You also asked about the use of reserves. You know, we agree with you, and that was one of the points I made up front. We have to be careful that we do not rely too much on the use of reserves for 2 key reasons. Number one is you run the risk of building in a deficit or creating a structural deficit in your budget. Because if you use reserves as a revenue, you know, what are you going to use the following year? And then secondly, we don't know how long this is going to go on for. Is it 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years in terms of our recovery? We don't want to use all of our reserves in any one given year, especially the first year. So I think both the town and the school district have been pretty judicious in the recommended use of reserves as a starting point, given all the uncertainties we have. And then, you know, lastly, with respect to how we handle, you know, other components of the budget, again, there's just so much uncertainty here. We're trying to be careful, manage it carefully. On the pools, we don't know yet whether or not we're going to be in a position to open the pools. So that's why we budgeted to keep them closed. If we are in a position to open them, we are going to seek to do that in a very careful manner. And we will come to the council with other budget adjustments to allow that to happen. So I really want to emphasize that we're recommending that we close the pools for public health reasons, not so much for budgetary savings. So hopefully, you know, we all hope we'll be in a position to open the pools. Right now, it's kind of hard to envision that. But if we are, we'll come back to the council with a financial plan to allow for that. That's what I have, Mayor. I don't know if Mr. Privatera has anything he would like to add.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Privatera?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Peter Privatera, Director of Finance. And I agree. It's a hard decision to look to reserves and reduce reserve levels. I mean, especially when you're making or you're recommending budget cuts that impact service levels across the board. We looked at reserve levels in the risk fund that, and there were a couple areas, one in particular, that we felt comfortable reducing. We were carrying $1.5 million reserve level for uninsured claims. Now, the town has never had an uninsured claim. I had a discussion with the risk manager. I had a discussion with Rick Ledwith. What would the impact be if we dropped that reserve level down a little? And we felt that we can drop it down and still maintain a decent reserve level. But again, it's always a difficult choice when you're looking at, do we take a chance on dropping the reserve level a little, or do we cut services a little more? And again, my expectation is, when we get through this, one thing I would like to do is start building those reserve levels back up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. So Ms. Fay, anything further follow-up?
Just really, if I may, and thank you, and I promise this will be short. On the liabilities on the pension side, just real quick, I think you said that you would be making a smaller contribution there because of change in assumptions, and it's been a while since I looked at these kind of things and actually did this kind of stuff, but interest rates are down, the markets are volatile. What assumption change that would make the less cash afterwards?
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Privatera.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Peter Privatera, Director of Finance. This for the recent valuation, excuse me, the actuary informed us that we needed to use new mortality tables, updated mortality tables. Using updated mortality tables meant our liabilities were increasing because people are living longer. We decided to reduce the discount rate to 6.99% and utilize the new mortality tables. And that resulted in an increase of about $1.1 million. When we started looking at the budget and looking at areas that we can reduce, I contacted the actuary and I said, look, what's the impact? What's the possibility of us blending in the mortality tables over a multi-year period? And she informed me that a lot of towns were doing that to reduce the liability because some towns were getting hit with large increases. So I asked her to calculate blending in the mortality tables over a 2-year period. And I asked her if she thought, in her opinion, it would affect any portion of our credit rating. She said she did not think it would because a lot of communities were doing it over time rather than taking one big bite at the apple. So I asked her to recalculate the blended rate on the mortality tables, and that's what resulted in roughly an $890,000 reduction.
Thank you, Mr. Privatera. Next is Board of Education Vice Chair Lorna Thomas Farquharson. Ms. Thomas Farquharson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm Lorna Thomas Farquharson, Board of Education Vice Chairwoman. My question is really more so a comment that I just want to present to everyone, just recognizing the purpose for us being here. And I thank everyone for participating in this meeting. And just hearing the information shared as regard to the town side as it relates to the budget, and how we know that services will be cut as it relates to library services, 20 to 25%, senior center services also being impacted. And I think this certainly does not allow us to ignore the reality of what's going on right now within our town, our country, our world as it relates to the pandemic. And I think that's something that also causes us to remember the importance of doing all that we can to try to preserve some sense of normalcy, especially for those persons who are the most vulnerable. And certainly those are our seniors, but also our young people. And as it relates to Matt Hart, I appreciated you making the comment, I'll paraphrase, but you started off with your presentation by stating the need to maintain essential services provided by our educational system, as well as our quality of life. And that is just something I want to echo and support as well, in terms of the importance of us trying to preserve as much of our educational system as possible. And I know that we're coming in with just a 0.75% increase. However, that certainly was because of a lot of hard work done by the administration. Thank you so much for that. But I just want us to remember that as we enter the new year, because that will happen. We want to try to recognize all that our young people have been through as it relates to the impact of the pandemic with distance learning. And even though many opportunities have been afforded to our young people, it certainly has brought a lot of attention to the challenges that happen outside of the classroom as well. So I applaud and appreciate everyone's priority as it relates to preserving the needs of our educational system, our young people, and trying to account for that as we discuss and propose a budget moving forward. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Lorna. And next would be Minority Leader Lee Gold.
Thank you, Mayor. Lee Gold through Mayor Cantor. Number one, I'm brief comment. This is something that has never been seen before, something that we're addressing. We need, and what's concerning me is that what we're talking about right now really is more of a Band-Aid. We need to be looking down the road. We need to look at a 1 to 3, a 5-year plan to put in place. And I appreciate and applaud everything that Mr. Hart, Mr. Privateri, and Mr. Moore has, and their respective teams have done to put in place this tourniquet, so to speak. But we need to also pivot and keep the eye down the road as we proceed through this pandemic, this crisis. Obviously, I'll have some workshops with my fellow town council members to discuss a lot of what's going on the town council side with Matt Hart and Peter. So I'll reserve those questions at a later date, not to take up too much time here. But Mr. Moore, I did have a few questions. It's also nice going a little bit later, as everybody's already asked a lot of the questions that I've had. With the school closings, I know Mr. Williams discussed that, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to touch on something relative to that in terms of the school closings. Has there been any thought in a broader scheme? While I understand that the enrollment is down a bit, for safety purposes, in terms of consolidating some schools, maybe you can address that concept in terms of patrol and maybe some cost savings there. Additionally, if you could speak a little bit more about the non-lapsing account. I noticed that there's almost a contribution or savings of a pull of $1.5 million. Is that what we're talking about? Can you maybe just expand a little bit more on point 8 on that slide? And while the budget has decreased from what was originally proposed, there's still an increase. Is there something can you address where that's reflected in the budget, that 0.75 increase, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. Before I go to Mr. Moore, I am been asked for everybody to please keep their mics muted, their speaker muted until they speak. Thank you, because there is an echo. Mr. Moore.
Yeah, I can go through the second part. The money that's rolled over money are those things like substitute costs that we haven't used, all the things that were savings this year, and a lot of those are contracts that are still in negotiation. So that $1.5 million is an estimate. The $1 million, to look at what our personnel costs, just in terms of negotiated salaries and benefits, are a 3.8% increase just by themselves. So that's really where all the money is. So if we wanted to get down and cut another $1.5 million, it's either reserves or it's 25 teachers and bigger classes. That's where I am with the budget right now. There is nowhere else to go. The choice is either I spend more in reserves. So that's the question of, do we want to use the $1.9 million in reserves? I don't want to use the reserves, but I've got families that I'm in touch with every day that sure as heck don't want me cutting another 30 teachers from the schools, or in that case, another 40 teachers from the schools. That's really the only levers I have left for savings right now. This is trying to keep those costs as far away from the kids as possible, but we're 110th of 169 towns in cost per pupil expenditures, 110th of 169. 10 years ago, we were 80th. 20 years ago, we were 50th. 40 years ago, we were first in the state as far as per pupil expenditures per student. So The truth is that there's no place that gets the efficiency and the results that we do. And that's not really your question. I understand that. It's just, I don't really have anywhere to go. That's all salaries. That's what the $1 million in increase is that there's negotiated agreement. And I would expect that in the coming years, just as you say, you're right. We do have to plan because things are going to get perhaps, and we all expect, very difficult. And at that point, we would be looking at what does that mean for us? What does that mean for those negotiations? But to go through that right now, we wouldn't have an answer in time for the budget to be worked out. So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Gold, anything further?
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. Then next, I have Board Member Mr. Levine.
Thank you, Mayor Cantor. Rob Levine, Board of Ed member. I don't really have a question. I just had a statement as far as, forgive me, Board of Ed members, I said this last night, but I just wanted our town council brethren to hear it too. I was intrigued and encouraged by the idea being put forward that there would be a non-recurring account created on the Board of Ed side to allow the schools to maintain a quote-unquote surplus, or probably more appropriately like a firewall against what will be increased expenses that come back once we are up and running full-time again, hopefully no later than the fall. And I would hope that the town council supports the creation of that, and hopefully that would not be a one-off type of thing as a result of a reaction to the pandemic, in that it would also be something going forward, because as we all know, we're all wondering, like we've talked about how the schools will change permanently because of this with distance learning, or in our communities how they're changing, and in our professions how just everything is going to adjust. Some things may be better, and I think this is one of those budgetary things where, since the schools have typically given back close to $750,000 to the town at the end of the year fiscally, that they would instead retain that money and allow the superintendent and future Board of Eds to therefore budget smaller increases if they have a control, more of a control over the money that they've been appropriated, versus where it goes back to the town puts it into a reserve for the town, and then the school is therefore forced to potentially have a larger budget increase in the next fiscal year because they don't have those funds available to tap into. I would hope that, again, the town council will support the creation of that non-lapse fund, and that would be a permanent thing, so that it creates, ideally, a little bit more of a budget stability for years to come when the superintendent and board have to do their budgeting. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. So that's a comment and not a question. I'm going to ask Mr. Hart, do you want to say anything about that? Or are we going to, I think that's a policy decision for the council to make at some point. But that I think we will have that discussion. Is there, Mr. Hart, do you want to say anything, or just hold on?
Matt Hart, town manager. Thank you, Mayor. I understand the reasoning behind the recommendation. One thing I would point out is we have had a shared surplus account for many, many years now. And, at times, especially in recent years, the school district has returned money to the town that we've been able to utilize to help balance the larger town budget. We appreciate that. The same would extend to the schools in times of need. I think one of the things we'll have to look at, the council will have to look at in all of this is if we're going to have separate surplus accounts, it's going to be incumbent on all of us to make sure that we're budgeting very carefully for contingency purposes. And that may actually drive an increase in the budget. You know, we don't know that. But I certainly understand the reasoning behind this, especially at this point in time. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hart. Okay, the next person is Counselor Kerrigan.
Sorry about that. Sorry. Had some problems unmuting. Thank you, Councilor Kerrigan, through you, Madam Mayor. First of all, I want to say thank you. We're all aware the crises that we find ourselves in, and I'm just thankful that we have a town manager, I want to say, Matt, to respond to a new town budget in the way that you did with the help of Peter is impressive. I know that we're all nervous about losing valuable services and not taking care of our community the way that we are so used to taking care of our community. And I do say this, that I know the leadership here, the Board of Ed, Tom Moore, with respect to education and the counselors, we will together ensure that our community is well served on both the town and the Board of Ed. I believe that because that's who we are. But I do want to thank you, Tom, for really sharpening your pencil in coming forward with this proposal of a budget. And I know that it's big part by the mayor. So I'm impressed. I continue to be impressed. So thank you all. I have two questions, one for Matt Hart. So this one's for you, Matt. You list one of your ways to accomplish your budget, your proposed budget, is through union concessions. I'm just kind of curious, nothing details, but have there been any conversations that would lead one to believe that that's a possibility that we could have union concessions?
Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Hart, I think that I don't know if that's okay for public discussion, but Mr. Hart.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. I can certainly touch on Councilor Kerrigan's question. I think it's an important one. No, we have not had any real conversations yet, and I think with respect to collective bargaining strategy, we would meet with the council to discuss it in closed session. I will point out that all of our non-public safety unions, we are still in negotiations with them. And, I'm kind of viewing this somewhat analogous to the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, when both labor and management worked together to come up with budget savings that would minimize layoffs, things along those lines. And I am optimistic, given our relatively strong labor management relationship here, that we would be able to accomplish the same, working ideally in a collaborative manner. So this is an estimate. Right now, more information to come.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Ms. Kerrigan, you have one. I understand, and I just will say, Rob Levine, I heard you raise your hand. I did not see it. I apologize. I will come back to you after Ms. Kerrigan. Go ahead, finish, Ms. Kerrigan.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. This is for Tom Moore. And I would be remiss if I didn't congratulate you and Gretchen Nelson, who I've seen, at Charter Oak, just running into a car to help bring someone their grab and go and juggling around with the Chromebooks. The fact that you were able to transition in such short notice to online education, and I have two kids that are taking advantage of that or utilizing that. I know I have a friend who received a call from a vice principal at one of the schools because the student wasn't involved as much as they thought. So these teachers are really taking this seriously. So our kids are in good hands. I feel so good about that. Congratulations on the 5%. My question is, with respect to the 13%, I know that we are high. What is the state average on special education?
Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. Mr.
The state average is about 12%, but it's the 12%. You know, special education, as you know, is such a broad. Sorry, Tom Moore, Superintendent. Special education, such a broad overview that not all two diagnoses, not all two manifestations are the same, and that's why I use the example. So we're going to be at 13.8%, and the state average is 12%. But I use that children living with autism as example, whereas the state average of in the average schools, special education, 12% of the special education kids are children living with autism, whereas in West Hartford, it's closer to 20% of our special education population of children living with autism. So families moving here for those services, and those services are typically, for the more needs that somebody has, the costlier and the larger the number of services we provide are. So that's why that compares.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Kerrigan, anything?
Thank you. Just so I understand completely, the 13% reflects the percentage of the population, but in terms of cost, how do we compare to the rest of the state?
Thank you, Ms. Kerrigan. Mr. Moore?
Well, on a per pupil expenditure, we'd be higher because the type of special education that we have would be higher. So special education is taking a larger percentage of our budget than it is. It's almost impossible to ferret out exactly what is special education because you count the regular ed teacher that's with there, you know, so there's so many different ways to categorize that you basically just look at the total N of dollars spent. And, you know, we're the 10th largest district in the state of Connecticut, and we're in the top 10 in spending in special education.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
Ms. Kerrigan. Okay, and I'm sorry, I guess Mr. Levine had not finished his question, so I apologize. And I know that a couple other counselors have questions, so I will go back to you once we complete the list. But this was because there was an uncompleted question, Mr. Levine. And that was Superintendent Tom Moore that just spoke. Sorry about that.
So you do want to come back to me right now or wait?
Yes, no, Mr. Levine, you are on deck. You are on.
Okay. Yeah, my point was just in response to Matt's comment. Is it okay that I call you Matt? I get this formality stuff kind of just goes beyond me. All right.
For purposes of this, you can just refer to him. We're not going to go back and forth because it's cumbersome. But go ahead, Mr.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear with my statement, Mr. Hart. Love your last name, by the way. You know, Hart Real Estate. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So I was just going to say that, you know, my whole reasoning behind thinking it would be a good thing for the board would also make it a good thing for the town, actually. And maybe we just kind of come at this from different viewpoints, and I get that. But my thought was that if the Board of Ed was allowed to hold on to its surplus, if it had one, we seem to every year, that not only would it help on the Board of Ed side, which is, as we all know, the largest single line item in the town budget, because just like anybody knows, I mean, like we're all people that craft our budgets, right? Like if you when you squirrel away nuts for the winter and you don't use them all, it makes it a little bit easier in the following year. To Mr. Moore's point about the ever increasing special ed costs, where if we've got a fund to tap directly into, instead of a 3% or a 4% increase, maybe it's lower. And then that lowers the entire town budget. And then, I don't know, call me crazy, if the town can't rely on our surplus to defer costs, I don't see that as a necessarily a budget increase for the town, Mr. Hart. I would see that as then the town just needs to sharpen their pencil, as Kerrigan said, and figure out a way to save funds on their budget directly, since they wouldn't have that anymore. So that's just what I was coming at it from, and how I see it working. But that's just my perspective. But thank you for letting me speak.
Okay, next question goes to Board Member Passon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I have one question each, one for Mr. Hart and one for Mr. Moore. First, let me just say that I appreciate the long-term outlook of this. It was nice hearing that from the town council side. The question for Mr. Hart is, you spoke of part-time employees being like, I was wondering if you could elaborate on what kind of services might be affected. And for Mr. Moore, I know you can't go into the details of the transportation contract, and it's some place that I look forward to see some savings in without, hurting our great bus drivers and everybody else that is employed through them. But I was hoping that maybe you could talk about when the natural end date for that contract was and when you might go back into negotiations for a new one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Passon. Now, I think we'll go to Mr. Moore first.
Tom Moore, Superintendent. After this year's cycle, we have 2 more years left on that contract.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Passon, anything further? Or Mr. Moore?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. As I reported earlier, on the town side, we have laid off 130 part-time employees. I think their last day of pay was April 10th. The vast majority of those employees are from the library, as well as leisure and social services. A smaller number from public works and facilities, and then a handful of other departments as well. I'm not sure in terms of how many we will be able to bring back next fiscal year. My best estimate right now is approximately 50%.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Anything further, Ms. Poisson?
I guess my main concern with the response, which is great, would we be able to reopen the library without bringing back those part-time employees?
Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Part-time employees are essential to the library's operation, so we would be bringing back some number of them. As Mr. Privatera noted in our presentation, though, we are anticipating next year that the library would see a 20 to a 25% decrease in its operations, and that would be a combination of hours in which they were open, as well as a reduction in the number of programs that they could provide because part-time employees are so essential. We did work hard, though, to make sure that the programs and services that we are providing to the neediest members of our community would remain in place. One example I want to highlight is a very popular and very much needed summertime lunch program at Faxon Library. So we would be able to continue to provide that service. When we were initially talking about reductions on the town side, we were looking at as much as a $600,000 reduction to the library. And, we realized that was just too extreme. We were going to be reducing their operations probably by 50%, if not more, if we did that. So we restored roughly half of that money. But we'll still see a reduction in what they're able to do.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Passon, do you have anything further?
Just to thank you, Mr. Moore and Mr. Hart, for the presentation. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Next up is Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to, through you, Liam Sweeney, Town Council, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank everyone who's on this call for everything that everybody's doing during this time. But after receiving this document, this budget, I'm just really impressed with the leadership of both Deb and Sherry, Tom, Matt, Peter, Gretchen, and Liz. Thank you guys so much for really, grinding it out and coming up with a document here that I think is something that I think we can all present to the public on both sides and be fair. There are a lot of families that are struggling right now, and I think that looking at a no tax increase, in fact potentially a tax decrease, is just something that I think is really great that this town is doing, and I think it's impressive and encouraging during this time that we're all working together in this way. And I just want to I wanted to say that because I know that it's really tough, and I know that on both sides, you guys, particularly on the school level, you guys can identify faces that you may not see next year because of these cuts, and I think that's really important to just say thank you for the hard work that you're putting forward. I also wanted to just echo both Leon and Beth's comments about particularly the work that the school district did during the early onset of this with regards to the distribution of Chromebooks and meals, and continuing to distribute meals. I think talking to folks across the state, West Hartford without question was a leader on this issue, and it is really the folks that are here today are really imperative in making that have happened, and it was just really impressive to see Councilwoman Kerrigan. I also volunteered and got to see it firsthand, and was just unbelievably impressed with the staff that and their continued commitment to make sure that all the kids were receiving everything that they needed during these times. I have one question, and that question has to deal with this is to Tom. The question I have is how would we anticipate dealing with potential stimulus and CARES Act funding to this budget and going forward?
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Moore.
Thanks, Liam. Thanks for your kind words too. My team really appreciates it, and so many people are doing such great work and have been straight out to make sure our kids are fed and can get the equipment. So really, that means a lot. We're hoping that CARES Act funding that comes in could also go into either into the non-lapsing account or offset special education costs, so that next year we haven't dug this hole that we can't fill. We don't know what that will be yet. We have some good ideas, and we're hoping that in the future we'll get more that will offset those costs of things like compensatory education that we'll be responsible for all the special education students that aren't getting, though they're getting a lot right now, and the work that's being done is great, but anything that comes through with that or additional needs that would happen both with education or social emotional support. And that's one of the factors. If you asked any of my principals before the budget started, what should we do? They would have all said, we need to add more social workers, every one of them. And, now we're fighting to keep the number that we have when we've had growing needs from our population, and they're going to be worse next year. And so there's not a shortage of need, especially in the area of social emotional health for our kids. That is really besides the regular health concerns I have going back, the social emotional needs of so many of our kids is something we're going to have to be paying very close attention to. So really, stimulus money would go towards special education and would go towards offsets in future years too.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Sweeney, anything further? No? I can't see you on my screen.
Sorry, I do. One quick follow-up, and that is.
Yep.
So, Tom, do you foresee potential? I know that changes or expansion of cost into the summer, like potential summer school expansion. I know that the CARES Act provides a lot of flexibility for districts, and do you see those as being potentially using that CARES Act funding for programming in the summer. I know that you just talked about some of the stuff that you may use it for, but do you also foresee using it for some of these other programming during the summer?
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Moore.
Tom Moore, Superintendent. Thanks. Thanks, Liam. Yeah, we would use it during the summer if it comes in time. I mean, it's which money you're talking about, 2 pots. The other question is, does that mean August before the school year starts? As I said earlier, like if we're seeing when we can get it, could it mean an extended school day for some kids next year? Maybe if we're still in the digital in the summer and that's not working, all of those things would be things that could be used. But yeah, it could be used as soon as this summer to offset our compensatory education needs or extended school year needs for our kids.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Sweeney, all set?
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Next is board member Ari Steinberg. Mr.
Hi, I'm Steinberg from Board of Ed. I don't have any questions, but similar to, what everybody else is saying, I really just want to acknowledge how difficult this budget process has been for both the Board of Education and the town. And that being said, I just want to thank all of those involved, particularly Mr. Privatera and Mr. Hart, as well as Liz Hewitt and Superintendent Moore. They really had to be the ones to make those tough decisions, as well as everybody on this call. But I think, working together, we're all trying to maintain and continue to prioritize the overall well-being of our town. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Ms. Steinberg. So you're all set then. No further questions, correct? Okay. When we go with Councilor Winograd.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, as everybody else stated, thank you very much for the entire team. It's very impressive body of work, and certainly to the Board of Ed side, what the teachers and the school staff have been doing is amazing, and the kids are learning, which is just so difficult in this time. I do have one question just on the board budget. The retiree health reserve. We heard, is this this is an OPEB fund. This is the post-retirement benefits reserve. It, as I understand it, they had been talking about a different health insurance reserve fund. Is this the only fund that the board has, or are there other reserve funds that haven't been touched?
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Mr. Moore.
I would defer to Liz on this question also.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Hewitt.
Elizabeth Hewitt, Director of Finance for West Hartford Public Schools. Ben, what we're talking about is the Retiree Health Reserve, which has been set aside to deal with retiree benefits. However, it is separate from the OPEB trust that I believe you're familiar with, because both the town and the board contribute to the OPEB trust. But this is the only reserve that that the board has, and we will be making a judicious use of that for this upcoming year, and potentially a step down use in future years.
Thank you, Ms. Hewitt. Mr. Winograd, anything further?
Thank you. So that is the fund we had heard about. What is that fund for? Obviously, it was a good thing we have it for this. But generally, what is the purpose of that fund?
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Ms. Hewitt?
Elizabeth Hewitt, Director of Finance. So this fund had been set up approximately 30 years ago, actually, as we tried to advance fund our retiree health costs. And the town has a fund and the board has a fund, and we make a contribution every year. Once some of the general governmental accounting standards changed and we were required to officially measure and then begin to fund this liability, we actually moved to an OPEB trust model. So we've been using this fund first to accumulate resources, second to phase in our contributions to OPEB trust. but certainly being able to cover our retiree health costs this year is a good use of those dollars that have been set aside over the years.
Thank you, Ms. Hewitt. Mr. Winograd, anything?
That's it.
further?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Winograd. And last on this list, before we go back and see if anyone has any follow-up questions, and I know Ms. Blanks does, Mr. Zdanowitz, Board Member Zdanowitz.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark Zdanowitz, Board of Ed. I'll echo all the thoughts out there. Thank you for all the hard work for the town and the school side. I have a lot of family members throughout the country that are teachers across the country and locally. Happen to be in New Hampshire for the last 6-7 weeks, and believe it or not, I have live around me and state officials, what they're doing in the school as well.
Mr. Zdanowitz, it's very hard to hear you. I don't know if there's anything that you can do to be a little closer to your mic. But if you say, I have a lot of family that are teachers, then maybe continue from there. It was hard to hear.
And I was thanking everybody for all their hard work. I hope this is a little better. I'm a little closer. So I just want to thank everybody for doing. There's been I personally got some emails saying that West Hartford came out of the gate slow, and that's absolutely not the case. We came out faster than most. And I just want people to know that out there. We got emails from a lot of, I did at least. And I just want to take my hat off for all the hard work that the administration and Tom Moore's team is doing back home. And then on the town side too. I know this is unprecedented times, and I just want to thank everybody first and foremost. I had a few, just one question. I think this might be for Mr. Hart. I talk about this on the Board of Ed side a lot, on the CIP budget. You know, sometimes it's good to spend money in times like this. And, you know, for Department of Public Works, asphalting. Asphalt will probably never be cheaper in our near future or in a lifetime than it is right now. We could take advantage because asphalt is closely related to gas prices. And it is an unprecedented time as that as well. And the other comment I have, too, is I've been on a lot of these in the past 6 weeks, these video conferences. And when we first got on to the meeting, I kind of wanted to chime in. But, you know, I don't know if this particular platform supports presenting. You know, if you can show what you're presenting, the charts that you're talking about, instead of having to go maybe on your phone or click off from the video. I don't know if this does. If it does, then we should use it. If not, there are other alternatives out there that we've used in the past. And this is a comment just on a continuous improvement method, like Google Chat and things like that will do presentations and such. So that's all. A lot of people ask great questions, and I appreciate everyone's time.
Okay, Mr. Zdanowitz, then are you all set? No questions specifically for either Mr. Hart or Mr. Moore, correct?
No, the question for Mr. Hart. Can we take advantage of being without because of
okay.
So low.
Okay, I didn't know if that was a comment or a question. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Mr. Zdanowitz, thank you for your question. You know, we are taking another look at the capital budget, and we'll likely recommend some revisions to that too. We will, on the town side, prioritize road projects, and I've asked the superintendent for his priorities as well, which I have received, but likely going to recommend some reduction in spending for the first 2 years of the capital improvement plan, and that is for fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. And the reason I will recommend a reduction for the council to consider is just to better manage the cost of debt service, which would follow in FY22 and FY23. Because debt service can be a significant budget driver. But again, I appreciate your comment. Road projects are something we will prioritize on the town side. With respect to the presentations, we'll look at that as well. You know, I guess I was assuming that folks might have 2 devices available so that they could participate both in the video chat, if you will, and then pull up the documents on a separate device. And I realize now that not everyone might be in that position. So we'll consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Anything further, Mr. Zdanowitz? Sorry.
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Zdanowitz. Now we will go back up to Ms. Blanks. You had another question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you, Town Councilor Carol Blanks. And I have a couple of questions that I didn't ask earlier. The first question I have is for Mr. Moore or one of your staff, and it's around the consolidated bus routes and reducing 3 routes. Would you elaborate on that for me in terms of, were they selected based on, I guess, rider use? Is there less students on those routes that are going to be reduced? And where about in town in terms of the impact on those students? And then I'll ask my second question after that. Through you, Madam.
Thank you, Ms. Blanks. Mr.
Thank you. Tom Moore, Superintendent. Thanks, Carol. It's there's not specific routes. We'd actually be consolidating all of our routes and kind of redrawing, so it will lead to tumult for some people in the fall, because there will be some different bus stops. There will be some further walks to the bus. This is a reflection of the question before about declining enrollment. This is a function of declining enrollment. Is this a time where we can get some savings from buses? And the truth is, the answer is we're really trying to, and maybe we could collapse 4 bus routes, but maybe it's only going to work out to 2, because we can't do our bus routes until we have the addresses of all of our kids. So we're in the middle of our kindergarten registration right now. It's not just our bus routes, but obviously we manage all the private school buses. And so going through all of the bus routes that we offer in town, we can't really do that until we know where every stop is. But there may have been a bus stop in a neighborhood for 20 years that next year isn't where that bus stop is, because we've redesigned and doing it in a way that can be timely and also not overfill our buses. And especially with COVID-19, that's a question. We're going to try it, and hopefully we get some savings there. We think we can, but I'd be lying if I said I'm 100% positive exactly where it is or anywhere else, because we have to go through our program and redesign all of our routes to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Back to you, Ms. Blanks.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, Councilor Carol Blanks, Town Council. The second question I had was around the elimination of the new math coach position at the middle school. And I know in the past that math was one of the board's measures. So I'd like to know, I guess, the impact of that elimination, and with that elimination, what is the strategic plan or the plan around providing services to students who are in need of that math assistance or additional assistance?
Thank you, Ms. Blanks. Mr. Moore.
Yeah, this was an addition to match the good work that we've had from math coaches at the elementary level, where we've seen some great gains over the past couple of years. And the truth is, I'd love to tell you we're going to do it this way. We're not. It's going to be a person that we were going to add, and a program that we're going to add for not just our kids, but also for our teachers doing model lessons. We had a long presentation about it during the year. I hate to take it out. And this is kind of that example of, well, what's the next $1 million? It's all coaching. It's all teachers. And I mean, academic coaching. That's where the next cuts are. So, that came first on the list, but it kind of was almost in reverse order in terms of to get to a number that doesn't require a tax increase and for the board to do our part. I'd love for you to put it back in. It's just, that's what we had to do to get to that point.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Blanks, anything further?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted, like everybody else, I just wanted to say my thanks, not only to the town staff, but to the board staff and the district staff, and to all of us on this call, especially this virtual call. I know this is new for all of us. I know for me in the beginning, it was a bit frightening to make sure that you have the technology right. But I think now that we're on it, I think we're doing a fantastic job. And I know this team works hard, and March is always a tough month because it's a budget month. But I have to say, I'm impressed by everybody. The elected officials volunteer their time. And I mean, everybody has just risen to the occasion. So I think we are all can be proud of what we're doing. And I think that the town is very appreciative and also proud of what we're delivering. So I just want to say thanks and kudos to everybody.
Thank you, Ms. Blanks. Appreciate those wonderful words. Mr. Hart, did you want to just circle back with Mr. Zdanowicz on his comment? You had a potential response?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Matt Hart, Town Manager. Mr. Zdanowicz, we do have the capability of incorporating presentations into the WebEx platform. So we will work to do that in the future. Again, thank you for that good suggestion.
Thank you. So we have gone through the list, and Ms. Blanks had let me know she had another question. Are there any other questions? I'm going to scroll through the bottom, and just raise your hand high, so like to the top of your screen, because your thumbnail for me on the bottom, so I don't see. Okay, I see Deb Pullen. Okay, Chairwoman Pullen, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Deb Pullen, Chair of the Board of Education. This is more of a comment also, but just to reiterate, and I think this was mentioned, that we on the board side, like you on the town side, are operating under a lot of unknowns at this point. And it's unknowns on the spending side of things, but also unknown on the revenue side. I think it was Councilman Sweeney who mentioned funding from the CARES Act. We haven't been told how much funding is coming our way for education from the CARES Act, but we do know that Congress has prioritized getting money to the schools so that we can maintain high quality public education. And also just to mention, in case anybody wasn't aware, that there have been some executive orders from Governor Lamont, which have added some mandates onto boards of education around maintaining employees through this year, and we're not exactly sure what the intention is for the coming year. So that said, we will certainly appreciate having some flexibility as we move into our next school year and through our next school year, and the implementation of a non-lapsing account for the Board of Education would help with that flexibility. So that's part of the thinking behind that, and I just wanted to let you know sort of where I'm coming from and what some of the other pressures are and other challenges that are presenting for us here.
Thank you, Ms. Pullen. Okay, thank you. Appreciate the comments. Anything further for you? You're all set? Okay. Anybody else have a question? I know Ms. Blanks. Okay, who am I? Oh, Lorna, I see you on. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Lorna Thomas, Vice Chair. My question is, Chair, and also take advantage of this opportunity to be before all of you. Any words of advice that you can share to our young people, recognizing what they are going through right now, but certainly recognizing the importance of resilience when times are difficult and tough? And with all of you council persons being in a role of leadership, what words of advice can you pass on to our young people, where even though this stressful time, how it will build strength within them to move forward in other difficult times in years to come?
Thank you very much. I think we'll end on that, if that's okay, and if you don't mind. And I know that there were a couple other questions, because I think that's an important way to end, about the importance of strength in these really challenging times. And Will, if you don't mind, and even I'll circle back with you to tee it off again. Is that okay? Okay. All right. I know Ms. Blanks had another question for Mr. Moore. Are there any other questions? I see a lot of, it looks like some of you have signed or shutting your videos, probably eating some dinner. I don't know. Would you, if there's any other questions, if somebody else sees a question or someone had a question, please let me know. Okay, Amanda. Okay, go ahead, Miss Aronson. Sorry, I'm getting to the casual point.
That's okay. Thank you, Amanda Aronson, Board of Education. I just wanted to circle back. Mr. Gold had raised the comment earlier about strategic planning, and I just wanted to circle back to that just to add that reassurance that I know we're all very eager to dig into some nuanced strategic planning for the upcoming years. But from the education side, this year, I think looking at everything that has been expressed in the amendments, that what's been put forth for us is very measured, because nationally, I think the one area that really is uncertain right now is the schools. And at this point of the year, to be budgeting out for this next school year with so many things that we don't know, I feel very comfortable with what's been put forth, because next year at this time, we're going to have so much more information to plan from. And I know that we are going to be very eager to dig into some longer term planning. But I think for the community, it's as honest as we can be. And Tom and all of the leaders on the central office team have built up a tremendous amount of trust, that they know that they can trust the continuity of operations, and that, you know, living here in West Hartford, from the town side and from the school side, that when there's an emergency, we're steady. And I think that the trust that's been built up, and then hearing what the response has been from the council and from the school board for what we're going to value and what we're going to try to work from, I think that we've been hearing positive comments from people that they're reassured by that. So I just wanted to offer you that that reassurance on the council side, that we're also very eager to dig into that too. But I think that next year we're going to have a lot more to go off of.
Thank you, Ms. Aronson. I know I have, Ms. Blanks has another question, but is there anything else, anything further from anyone? And then we'll have Ms. Thomas Farquharson kick us off on a closing. Okay, I think Ms. Blanks, to you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, Carol Blanks, Town Councilor. My final question, and it's for you, Tom. I understand that 95% of our students are successful receiving their distance learning, but there's a small percentage, maybe about 5%, that there's some challenges there. Can you elaborate on that? I'm concerned about students in that particular situation, especially as the COVID advances, and then we have our out years. So I'm just concerned about how is the district handling those students and their families?
Thank you, Ms. Blanks. Mr. Moore.
We're trying to actively contact any family that that the child hasn't logged on or gotten into. And to the extent that we've done calls, emails, repeated calls, and there's a process where it goes through where the administration gets involved, and including Andy Moore, our Assistant Superintendent, Eric Dempsey, our Director of Security, who've actually done home visits. And then if we can't get further than that, actually involving our local first responders to make sure to do a wellness check. But it has happened that even with that, we had a list that we pared down and we were into the single digits. But the thing to remember is some people also left the state. Mr. Zdanowitz is in New Hampshire right now. Some families left to other areas, and it hasn't been as easy to necessarily get in touch with them. And that's one of the things we don't know about as people come back too, is how many people will come back. If they're health impaired, would they choose a different model? Those are all the kind of things that we're really going to be questioning. But we do everything we can to find every kid that's not clicking on, and the teachers are the first line of defense, but we're actively taking attendance and looking out for those kids. So I'm actually pleased with the percentage we've been able to connect with.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Blanks, anything further?
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Okay. Going through again one more time. Okay. I don't see anybody. Does anybody else see anybody that I don't see? Okay. Back to you, Ms. Thomas Farquharson. Can you bring us back to Really what I think is so important right now, supporting each other, inspiring each other, giving strength to each other during these truly unprecedented times. And that's what leaders do. So back to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Lorna Thomas Ferguson, Board of Education Vice Chairperson. I will this time add a quote that I often use and many of my colleagues have often referred to as well, coming from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which states, or rather where he stated, the true measure of a man is not measured in times of comfort and convenience, but rather challenge and controversy. I think collectively we all can say that we certainly are in the midst of that. However, we know this is an opportunity to show resilience, and certainly we are in the works of doing that. And our young people need to know the importance of that as well, that even though times are tough, times are difficult, they are building skill sets and they are building strength that will help them carry them through in future years when additional difficulties come. And so I was asking an open-ended question to those counselors who are willing to share words of advice that you may pass on to young people to inspire them to recognize the resilience they have, for you yourself have demonstrated that in our current state of times.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas Ferguson. That is a really beautiful and challenging. Mr. Williams, anything? I'll go through the list. Actually, Ms. Blanks was first. Ms. Blanks?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Counselor and Carol Blank. My message with students. Fear not. Embrace strength, and do what is in your control. And remember social distancing and physical distancing so that we can flatten the curve and minimize the spread of this virus.
Thank you, Ms. Blanks. Mr. Williams?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chris Williams. I think, as hard as it is for students, and I can't imagine being under quarantine with my folks when I was particularly in high school, I think it's important now more than ever to always focus on the silver lining, and it is some extra time to spend with your family, maybe a little bit too much, but there's going to be a day when you miss that, and so I think trying to always see the bright side is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Davidoff?
Madam Mayor, I often say that the most important people live within the four walls of their home. And during these days, it's a little bit more. It's the most important people live within our community. So during these challenging times, I'd encourage people to reach out to that neighbor down the street to see how they're doing. Reach out to people just with a simple call, maybe a note, a text, whatever it does. Or better yet, just be that listening ear for somebody. Because just to know that somebody is there to listen to you, to hear you out, and possibly provide advice is something that we're all capable of doing. And I think that's what makes our community so wonderful, is that people have taken this challenge, this crisis, and have stepped up to help so many others. There's so many vulnerable people who need assistance, who don't ask. But we're there. We may be alone, but together we will get through this.
Thank you, Mr. Davidoff. Ms. Fay?
Yes, Mayor Cantor, thank you very much. Let's see. I think everything is a learning opportunity, and certainly this crisis, the pandemic, is very, very serious. For myself personally, I haven't seen anybody in my family for about 7 weeks, maybe 8. Yes, it's the end of February, so that's unusual because anybody who knows me, we kind of travel in a pack. We're one big clan, so I haven't even seen my dad. But hopefully I can soon. I just don't want to risk getting him ill because he's 85 years old. So while it's very, very serious, you see kids. I have a 10-year-old on the other end of the spectrum, and she's been very creative. I first thought, what am I going to do with her? She has school, which she's learning a lot and adapted to technology very, very quickly. But she's found ways to be creative and ride her bike and be outside and do other things. So I would say still maintain your social distance or physical distance, if you will. Adhere to Governor Lamont's requirements. So if you cannot do that, please wear a mask or facial garments, a scarf or something over your face. And be adaptable, be resilient. It's a trait that's going to serve you very, very well in the long run. The world is constantly changing. We're going to always have challenges thrown before us, and try to find the silver lining. I've actually really enjoyed the three of us being together for this time. It's unusual, and we all have busy lives, and we all have busy spouses and whatnot, and it's kind of nice to have this time and be open-minded to what that new normal is going to look like. So resilience is never a bad trait. It's very, very good. It's very positive. It will serve you well, and be flexible and adaptable.
Thank you, Ms. Fay. Mr. Gold.
Lee Gold through Mayor Cantor. Thank you. I've been listening to everybody, and there's some words that I can't do them justice. They didn't come from me, but the day after the Yom HaShoah, who people may or may not know, but there are some people on the council who do know that, and hopefully everybody does. But it's a commemoration honoring the memory of the martyred 6 million during the Holocaust. And Elie Wiesel spoke some very important words. I think it rings true to what we're dealing with here. Just as despair can come to one only from other human beings, hope too can be given to one only by other human beings. And I think all of us as leaders of our town need to bring hope to everybody so that we can continue on, move forward, and be appropriate leaders directing in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. That was beautiful. And it is Yom HaShoah, which is a very solemn day as we remember so many that have been lost. And it's just okay. Ms. Kerrigan.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Councilor Kerrigan, I always seem to have a problem. I'm on the phone, so I have a problem finding the little button for the mute. And I guess it's always age specific, what you're telling your children. My kids are 18. They're experiencing this very differently. But what I try to help them understand is, as we go through the educational institution and we live our lives, we go through 9/11, we go through Sandy Hook, we go through wars that are in distant places. This is your time where you're experiencing a moment in history that the whole world is experiencing almost at the same time, a crisis of proportions of which I have never seen before. It's something that will be in history books. You will be learning about it, but you have the opportunity to live it. You're living it, so it'll define who you are. And, too much is given, much is expected, that this is your moment to be that person who gives back to help others in a time of much crisis. So it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to see what we are and to be better at who we are. So thank you, Lorna, for that question. I appreciate it.
Wonderful, Beth. Thank you. Let's see, where are we? Mr. Sweeney.
Sorry, my going in and out of here. I appreciate what Lorna was saying and everyone's comments so far. I don't really have a whole lot to offer, folks. I think to Beth's point, I think we're all going through this circumstance. Everyone in the world is going through this at the same time, and everyone has their own way of dealing with it. I think I'm probably unique with Mr. Williams as well, where I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old at home while my wife and I are both trying to work. So it's a different experience, but at the same time, I'm reminded a lot that every day that we wake up and we are breathing, we are very lucky. After looking at the statistics every day, and so for that, I'm just so proud that everyone here was able to come together with a compromise today. And I don't have any wise words for anyone other than to just keep keeping on. We're doing our best over here and trying to help everyone who we can along the way, and I think that's the whole point of why we all are here today. So
Mr. Sweeney, I think you've had the best quote though about do the quote of the plane.
Yeah, the one that I keep hearing all the time. Yes, we all are building this plane as we fly it, and I think that's the one thing that we keep coming across is, do you have an answer? When is this going to happen? I mean, as Deb said, they still don't know when, federal funding is coming. We don't know how, things are going to work out in town. And it's just flexibility and a good spirit is kind of helping us all kind of guide through this time right now. And it's really great to be on this call with everyone today, that it seems that everyone has that spirit right now. I know that just about everyone here has helped out the town and volunteered during this process on top of this service that they already do. So it's just really great to be in the presence of everyone here.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Winograd.
As Councilman Ben Winograd, as Liam said, I don't know that any of us have any claim to any great advice. I'll make two observations, I guess. One is that despite some loud exceptions, I think people should look around at society at how well we are working together to get through the crisis. Not just, certainly very much not just leadership, but far more so everybody staying at home, everybody maintaining social distance. The fact that we are bending the curve because of the actions of the vast majority of our neighbors is heartening. And hopefully that spirit of community will last beyond the crisis. And we are, as a people, not led by leaders particularly, but as a people as a whole, we are in fact having that impact, and all of us saving lives. And the other thing, sort of somewhat related to that, I guess, is that certainly for the older youth, or not so young, people have the right to be angry, and to be angry at collectively the generation of mine and older that haven't succeeded, and I would ask and encourage people to be active and use that legitimate righteous anger to try to make the world better. So maybe not the most inspiring, but I do hope that youth will work hard to make this kind of place where this doesn't happen again, and next time we're prepared better.
Thank you, Mr. Winograd. Now I'm going to go backwards on the board side. Mr. Zdanowitz.
Thank you, Mayor. This is Mark Zdanowitz, Board of Ed. A lot of great things said tonight in this closing. Just one piece of business, and I just want to close, and I don't need an answer, Mr. Hart, but the one thing is you talked about the CIP and looking and not spending out for 3 years, but remember, you don't want to walk over dollar bills to save pennies. Asphalt is at an all-time low right now because of gas prices. Just keep that in mind. There are opportunities there to spend money, just like there's opportunities to buy in the market and such. I don't need an answer for that. We are in unprecedented times right now, and I hope we collectively don't have to go through this again. Once this is all over, this is a great exercise. I love how we're doing this. As Tom mentioned, I'm in New Hampshire. I've been here for 6 weeks, and it's just, and I'm doing business as usual. Almost like it's a whole change of life. And we're getting through this, and I appreciate it. I just want everyone to keep in mind from a Board of Ed perspective and just from a family perspective, all those seniors out there, whether you're a senior in high school, senior in college, those are tough times for those students. Those are great memories that we all hold for many, many years, and I still hold them to this day. and they're not going to be able to have those same memories as we do. So just keep those in mind. And I'll end it with this. Ms. Kerrigan, you said that we lived it, we've been through it, we're going through it, and we have to learn from it and all that. Just remember, and on a levity place, is that next time we go through this, we have to buy toilet paper. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Zdanowitz. Ms. Steinberg.
Thank you. Arnold Steinberg, Board of Education. My child and adolescent psychologist brain is going to come out. I'm still working with children and adolescents every day through my job, and some of the things that we have tried to focus on for them is that it's really important to find moments of normalcy within your day, especially during these stressful and uncertain times. So if there's something that you do that makes you feel normal, you should do it. So when I'm running, it could be any other day. It doesn't have to be in the days of a pandemic. So it makes me feel normal, and I can just kind of be in that moment. So we try to encourage kids to find something, moments of normalcy. The other thing is, I wish that we hadn't kind of the phrase socially distanced. I try to encourage kids to reframe that to socially connected but physically distant. I think it's really important to keep up those social connections that we have. I'm very thankful for technology. I mean, my eyes are bloodshot by the end of the day with all of the Zoom calls, but it still allows us to stay connected. And I think that's really key, to not feel isolated during times like this and feel like you're alone. So I would like to propose that we're socially connected but physically distant. And then lastly, I really think it's important. I know we want to try to encourage kids to be resilient and do their best and be productive. But I think at the same time, it's really important to validate for them and acknowledge that sometimes it's okay to not be okay. And that we have to embrace those moments too. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Ms. Steinberg. That was beautiful. Mr. Pessin, and I'm sorry if I'm a little off on the syllable. I apologize.
It's okay. Thank you. I just want to thank everybody for this meeting. I actually am just by nature pretty skeptical about things, and I'm always looking at what we can do more. So I appreciate the time that everyone's taken. I especially appreciated Liam's comments. I have a 4-year-old at home, and I am her new teacher, and I have my wife expecting within a month or so. We're hoping it's a little longer considering the circumstances. But if you want to form a support group, we can do that. I'd love to find that normalcy that Ari was talking about in this time. I guess what I'd love to keep in the back of my mind, thinking in a very linear perspective, is, what can we do better? What can we do? What does the future look like coming out of this? I think I've already gotten feedback that everyone is going to love the mill rate drop. And I'm just wondering, what else can we do as leaders in our community to patch that normalcy back together? So I look forward to working with all the experienced leaders on this call and maybe guiding me in what I can do to help my community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payson, and good luck with the baby and everybody healthy, and I hope all goes smoothly. We will be listening and waiting. Mr. Levine.
I was just thinking, I guess, as leaders, I thank you all for your service. I think we forget to do that, and in a pandemic, it seems even more so. The hours that the community probably doesn't realize that you've put in behind the scenes, as well as a thank you to the staffs on the town and school side. The only thing I have to say is like Mr. Moore, I'm a student of history, and I hope it's another 100 years before we have a pandemic on this scale. And more immediately, I hope the federal, state, local governments are better prepared the next time this does come around, because this has been a difficult challenge for, I think, our society to handle. But I am an eternal optimist, and I think as leaders, we probably need to make sure that, you know, we're doing our best to obviously stay grounded in reality, but also not come across too dour, which I know in times of difficulty, it's very easy to do that. But as someone in sales, you have to remember perception is reality. And while, again, it's important to tell the truth, there's nothing wrong with doing it with a smile on your face and saying that this will get better and that things will improve and we will go back to a normal lifestyle, what with changes, of course. You don't come out of something like this without changes. But it's important, I think, to exude a level of confidence and positivity so that the citizenry of our town, our state, our nation feel that and buy into that, because it is going to happen. It's difficult times right now, but there are good times ahead again. And I hope we all do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Thank you, Mr. Levine. Okay, the lady who brought us to this point, Ms. Thomas Farquharson.
Thank you, Madam. I repeat what I said, ditto. I just, again, I thank all of you for being a part of this team. I think it certainly is a team effort that we are certainly demonstrating, and we have more work to do, but certainly it's work that's well worth it because it's for our young people, it's for the residents of this town, and collectively we will show our resilience. I also agree with what has been said, that it's okay to acknowledge when, you know, the load is heavy, but we're carrying the load, and collectively we can do that. So thank you all for your leadership, your support, your resilience, and let's continue the journey.
Thank you. Ms. Ernst.
Well, I appreciate that some of the comments that have come up have been about history, because as someone who's been a history and an English teacher, I find myself thinking a lot about what we've learned. And I would urge some of the young people who are listening to think about the characters that you've met in those books and how they survived things. And when you look back at the patterns of history, this is on par with what we've been learning. Things, you know, humankind, things get worse, they get better, they get worse, they get better. When you study history, you've heard of times when things have fallen apart, and listened and read books about how the characters pulled themselves through. And I find that very inspiring, because this is something that we know how to do. You know, human beings and generations of people know how to overcome difficult things. And we've met a lot of characters. Mr. Gold mentioned Elie Wiesel, who's someone that if you haven't read some of his books, he talks a lot about hope, and he talks a lot about faith and focus. And I find that very inspiring. And during times like this, I know for me, I'm trying hard to use what my parents taught me, which is to lean into the arts, because you can have a lot of fun with them. They're very calming. They connect you to other people, and they also bring a lot of joy to the day. And for me personally, I know that I need to exercise every single day. That movement, that physical movement every day, just makes you feel better. And also, I find myself outside quite a bit, even if it's just sitting in my own yard. I'm taking walks, I'm listening to audiobooks, I'm listening to what's around me. I'm enjoying the pace of things being slower. It's not something that we're going to get to experience much, I think, in our lives. And there is a part of me that is really trying to savor this time and practicing the ways that you cope. I would encourage adults and the young people in our community just to remember that coping with substances is oftentimes not the best choice. And if you Google my name, I'm sure you'll find more information on why I would remind you of that. But I find myself thinking a lot about my father right now. He taught me to lean into nature, to enjoy quiet activities, and they can be very calming, as can sleep apps and things that can just help slow your body down before it's time to go to bed. So no big words of wisdom other than, the human beings can overcome very difficult things, and oftentimes things need to get very difficult before they get better. And so I, for one, trust very much that we're going to be stronger than we were after this. And I'm excited to be part of the planning team that helps move us along towards that.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. And last on the board, and then Matt and Tom think of a gem, okay? Chairwoman Deb Bowlin.
Good evening, Deb Bowlin, Chair of the Board of Education. First, I just want to say that people should give themselves a break once in a while. It's okay to not be on task. It's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to not enjoy the extra time or the time with your family. It's okay to once in a while acknowledge that things aren't going the way that you necessarily want them to go. But I want to say too that this situation has really illuminated the need for and the impact of community. And our community, I think we all think is very special, but I feel that even more than I have in the past. So I will share a quote from Mr. Rogers, and it's not the one that you all know. I have two Mr. Rogers quote books. So I was thankfully last, so I had an opportunity to look through. And here it is. All of us at some time or another need help. Whether we're giving or receiving help, each one of us has something valuable to bring to this world. That's one of the things that connects us as neighbors. In our own way, each one of us is a giver and a receiver.
Beautiful. That was, I loved the movie too. Anyway. All right. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate everyone's inspiring remarks. I have teenagers at home, so I will try to address my comments more to that age group. And just emphasizing a couple of the points that were made earlier, just really encouraging our young people to stay connected in a virtual way. Obviously they need to maintain the physical distancing protocols, but stay connected with your friends and stay connected with your family. Those relationships are so important. And then secondly, this is advice I try to give everyone, is take some time, for yourself and to have a little bit of fun each and every day. This crisis is so all-consuming. It's on TV nonstop. Take a break from it. Go out and have a catch with your mom and your dad. Watch a silly movie with your little brother and sister. And we're going to get through it. This is one of the defining moments of your lifetime. And someday you're going to be able to look back on it, and there'll be some scary memories, but you'll also have some good positive memories as well of the connections you made with your family and with other folks. So I want to thank everyone for their inspiring words this evening, and those are a couple points I wanted to emphasize as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Mr. Moore.
Thank you. I know Chris Williams would know I'd be using something from European history because he listened to me for many a day years ago. I think of Winston Churchill and hopelessness and the idea that we just have to endure something. And the difficulty with enduring is, and we talked about this tonight, how far ahead can you look without just feeling that weight? And Churchill said it's a mistake to try and look too far ahead. The chain of destiny can only be grasped one link at a time. And I think that's important to remember, that we have our destiny in front of us and we can't get to the end till we pull every single link through. And as we go through this with our families, with ourselves, it's just that kind of slow and steady, and we will survive, and eventually we will thrive again. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I don't know if Liz or Peter want to say anything, but I don't know. Liz? Yes, no? You can pass if you want.
I think I'll pass on this one.
Okay. All right, so this is... You sure? Okay. Thanks. So I'll just close. First, I want to thank everybody for the productive meeting. There was a lot of information. I hope the public does educate themselves on a lot of the details of what we discussed here tonight and last night and the night before. And I do want to say that even in these really challenging times, there's so many of us that are trying to work as normal as possible and make sure that we're getting the town business done. And so please have the faith that we're doing that. You know, my children are, I'm seeing a little bit different impact. I actually had to do a message for the Yukon seniors that were graduating that, left their rooms filled with their belongings and will now have to somehow come back and empty those rooms with ideas of how they were going to end their college experience. I have friends with children that I was supposed to have 6 weddings this summer, and those plans are no longer probably going to be what they were. And there's so many things. My son's a musician, and he was scheduled to go on tour. Worked really for 2 years on a new album, and obviously it was canceled. And now he's distance learning music with many students, and it's lit him up in a different way. And so we're all finding those tools to cope and to make it through. And what are the most important things? The most important things are that we are gentle with each other, care for each other. We trust in each other. We tell each other the truth, that life is going to be in waves, that we're going to have good days and bad days. And we have to give each other the space to have those frustration and those frustrating times and those frustrating days. I see so many families, some with parents that are like, the kids are there all the time and they're rolling their eyes, and others that are, the parents have children from Brooklyn and Boston and wherever from a study abroad who never thought they'd have that time with their children to spend and talk. So there's unexpected pleasures and unexpected challenges in every turn. And I think it teaches us to slow down, appreciate the good days and the small, as I say, the small, what was the term I was using? The small victories, and just making sure that we aren't too hard on each other, too hard on ourselves. And we remember all those people that are working so hard to protect us. And so we have a job to protect them as well by being responsible and by being following the guidelines that we're told, even if they sometimes might feel so restrictive and severe. They're for a reason. And so I say that this is a special community. I know we're going to come out of this strong and together and unified. And your leaders, I think, as you've heard tonight, are really committed and working so hard. Leadership is not a position, it's an action. And I think you see that tonight. And I want to thank all of you. Be well, be healthy. And with that, we will close the meeting. Thank you so much. Good night.